This hearing will now come to order. I'm using my... we will have one eventually. Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing to the National Sea Grant College Program Act, H.R. 5618. H.R. 5618 was introduced by our colleague Congresswoman Madeline Bardaro, chair of the Subcommittee on Fisheries, Wildlife, and Oceans of the Committee on Natural Resources. The Sea Grant Program is a partnership between state and federal government to promote the understanding, conservation, and management of our ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes resources. Growth of the National Sea Grant College Program has been stunted during the last few years. Over time, the flat funding level has impacted the services delivered on a daily basis to our coastal communities. With the cost of research and education rising, programs have been forced to reduce staff and a number of education and outreach activities as well. H.R. 5618 seeks to amend the Sea Grant Program to implement changes in the program recommended by the National Academy of Sciences. Some of these improvements include increasing the interaction between the National Sea Grant Office and the individual state programs, as well as improving programmatic performance reviews and authorizing increased funding levels. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses here today who will highlight the activities and accomplishments of this program and offer their recommendations as to how we can improve this important research, education, and extension program. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. At this time, I'd like to yield to my distinguished colleague from South Carolina, our ranking member, Mr. Ennis, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Since its inception in 1966, the National Sea Grant Program has been a successful collaborative effort of the federal government, state governments, and universities. Under the program, these groups work together to understand, develop, and conserve our coastal and ocean resources. That's particularly important for us in South Carolina and other coastal states. Currently, more than half of the U.S. population lives on the coast, and that number is increasing. And coastal and ocean resources generate more than $1 trillion of the annual gross domestic product. This reauthorization should equip the Sea Grant Program to continue to provide sound science and management products to such a large part of our economy and population. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and hearing their perspectives on this legislation and any suggestions they may have as to improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. I ask unanimous consent that all additional opening statements submitted by the committee members be included in the record without objection so ordered. It is my pleasure to introduce the witnesses for this morning. Mr. Craig McLean is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Programs and Administration for Oceanic and Atmospheric Research at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Mr. Paul S. Anderson is the President of the Sea Grant Association and the Director of the Maine Sea Grant College Program. Mr. M. Richard DeVoe is the Executive Director of the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium, and Mr. Patrick Riley is the General Manager of Western Seafood in Freeport, Texas, which is my next-door neighbor. Welcome. You'll each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing, and when you all complete your testimony, we'll begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And Mr. McLean, we will begin with you, and please start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I'm administering to my technical proficiencies. I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. Well, good morning, and Ranking Member Inglis and Mr. Bartlett, good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning to discuss the National Sea Grant College Program. It's a very important program to NOAA. Sea Grant is an integral part of NOAA's mission to understand and predict the Earth's environment and to conserve and manage coastal, marine, and Great Lakes resources. Sea Grant is a national network comprised of the NOAA National Sea Grant Panel, the Sea Grant Office, 32 university-sponsored programs, the Sea Grant Law Library and the Sea Grant Law Center, fellowship programs, and hundreds of participating institutions. Each Sea Grant state program is established through competition and receives evaluation every 4 years. By linking university resources and expertise with local communities and user groups, Sea Grant promotes the effective transfer of science-based information in support of decision-making. In short, Sea Grant takes complex information and shows people how to use it and how to solve real problems. Sea Grant also expands the reach and effectiveness of other NOAA programs and other partners by leveraging additional funds. Sea Grant programs are required to match every $2 of federal funding with $1 of contributory funding, and many states far exceed this match. In 2006, for example, state Sea Grant programs provided $27 million of matching funds for their NOAA awards and stimulated contributions of an additional $62 million from a variety of state and federal sources. Over the past 2 years, we have aggressively responded to the recommendations of the 2006 National Research Council report on Sea Grant. The program is developing a more coordinated strategic plan for the next 5 years and will address issues affecting coastal regions locally and nationally. In the future, Sea Grant will also play a critical role in identifying the coastal and constituent needs for climate research, climate services, and climate-related information. This will be a very important contribution for Sea Grant. NOAA is supportive of efforts to reauthorize the National Sea Grant College Program Act. And in fact, the administration is transmitting to Congress the proposed bill that the administration has to offer, and perhaps it may have even arrived as early as last night. The administration's reauthorizing bill and H.R. 5618, the National Sea Grant College Program Amendments Act of 2008, take very similar approaches to strengthening this program. Both bills promote Sea Grant program investments in national activities by increasing the non-match funding pool. The administration bill proposes an increase in the non-match funding bill from 1% to 5% and includes the entire Canals Fellowship program. Both bills retain the requirements to evaluate and assess the performance of state Sea Grant programs, but removes the rigid ranking requirements amongst the states. This change would remove any disincentive to cooperation in the National Research Council report as it had identified, and thereby facilitate the development of regional collaborations among the Sea Grant programs. Both bills seek to strengthen Sea Grant programs by elevating the role and functions of the National Sea Grant Review Panel. Over the past 30 years, the role of the panel has evolved with Sea Grant's influence and effectiveness. Consistent with the recommendations of the National Research Council report, both bills propose to change the duties of the panel on providing strategic advice regarding the national program, as well as providing an assessment of the overall effectiveness of the program. The administration's proposed reauthorization bill and H.R. 5618 do have nominal differences, and one of them is the size of the cap on administrative funding to support the program and on the matching fund requirements in order to support the development of regional and national partnerships. The administration bill advances Sea Grant's capacity for regional and national leadership by adjusting the cap of administrative funding from 5 to 7%, which is responsive to the NRC's report recommendation to allocate resources sufficient to allow the NOAA National Sea Grant Program Office to accomplish its mission of oversight, leadership, and guidance of the program. The National Sea Grant Office today is about half the size it was 15 years ago in terms of staff, and the seniority of that staff has diminished as well. The increase in funding for the National Sea Grant College Office will strengthen the core of the Sea Grant network. To promote Sea Grant's involvement in regional and national partnerships, the administration bill proposes exempting these partnership activities from the matching fund requirements. We recognize the significance of the matching fund requirement as a means to leveraging funding. However, the requirement has at times made it difficult to form regional and national partnerships and interagency collaborations. The proposed change would allow Sea Grant programs to collaborate with a broader array of partners to address issues that are best addressed regionally and nationally. In closing, Sea Grant is an effective program, and it addresses the right problems defined by constituents, produces meaningful science, and relates directly to the attainment of NOAA's mission objectives. Sea Grant's ability to leverage resources and address issues in partnership and with other entities is truly unique in government. The reauthorization of Sea Grant is important to NOAA, and we look forward to working with you as the legislation moves through Congress. Together, we can ensure that the National Sea Grant College Program continues to generate practical solutions based on sound science that address real problems in real places. Thank you, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Anderson, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Questions? There you go. Good morning, Chairman Lampson, Ranking Member Otis, and committee members. My name is Paul Anderson. I'm the director of the Maine Sea Grant College Program at the University of Maine. I appear today on behalf of the Sea Grant Association in my capacity as president to offer our perspective on H.R. 5618. It's an honor to represent the nationwide network of Sea Grant colleges at this hearing, and it is with great appreciation that we acknowledge your leadership in this subcommittee's long history of support for the National Sea Grant College Program. I have a formal statement that I ask to be included in the record for this hearing. The SGA, Sea Grant Association, represents the combined capabilities of over 300 university and research institutions nationwide in the National Sea Grant College Program. The SGA enables these institutions to coordinate their activities and to prioritize action at the regional and national levels and offers a unified voice on critical coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes issues. Just as our nation's land grant institutions have revolutionized agriculture, so too are the Sea Grant colleges steering our nation toward the productive and sustainable use of our coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes resources through integrated and competitive programs of scientific research, education, and training and technical assistance. I want to start by providing an example, if I might, from my home state of Maine on how Sea Grant program has significantly contributed towards a sustainable environment and economy. I think you might find this story interesting. Like many of our coastal states, Maine is a seafood-producing state with both wild capture and cultured fish and shellfish. Also, like many coastal states, Maine is a popular destination for visitors with a significant tourism industry. The Sea Grant program has been working nationally with these two very large economic sectors to ensure compatibility and economic success for both. There are, however, challenges between these sectors and conflicts between them, and I'd like to tell you about an innovative solution to a conflict between the recreational boating or salmon community and part of the land industry that wants to grow blue mussels. You've all enjoyed blue mussels perhaps on your dinner plate. This grower proposed to put his growing operation, a floating raft structure, in the vicinity of where the boating community does much of their sailing. They're called Sea Grant because it was an issue. We brought the conflicting parties together, along with a mechanical engineer from the university, and we had to develop a device that allows the raft structure to sink below the water level on demand, and then, with the push of a button, to return the structure to the surface and harvest and maintain the operation. Out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. Much like your garage door opener, the device now has a patent pending and periodic regattas in that area continue. This is just one example of how Sea Grant operates as an honest broker, bringing together varying needs and perspectives and employing science and creativity to identify collaborative solutions to complex problems. It's unrealized potential of Sea Grant is illustrated by this example that provides the context for our comments on H.R. 5618. This show strongly endorses the intent and many of the proposed changes contained in H.R. 5618, and we pledge to do our part to help towards the bill's enactment. First, we support the adjustments offered in 5618 regarding program ranking and performance assessment in response to the NRC, the National Research Council's report that you just heard about. We're also pleased with the support the bill's increased emphasis on regional collaboration. We're particularly pleased to see that the bill provides enhanced flexibility in the allocation and overall management of resources within the program, which will allow for both program stability and our responsiveness. I think it's the responsiveness that is really something that's particularly keen with the Sea Grant program. And we strongly support the linkage of the Sea Grant planning and priority setting process to the interagency Ocean Research Priorities Plan, as was also just described. However, we do have one concern, and that's the authorization level that's contained in H.R. 5618. It represents a significant reduction, perhaps up to 33% compared to Sea Grant's FY08 or current authorization levels. Funding for the Sea Grant program has not kept pace, as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, with the extraordinary growth in coastal population and development and the resulting increasing demands on our program. current, the FY09 level proposed by the administration for the Sea Grant program would be asked to operate at its lowest level in 42-year history. So all that to say that we do feel that these declining trends in appropriations would be exacerbated by a parallel reduction in our authorization levels, and we hope the committee will consider that. The SGA recommends that the National Sea Grant College program be reauthorized at levels that would grow to $125 million by the year 2014. With this, Sea Grant will be better positioned to address a number of critical coastal issues, including coastal hazard resiliency, sustainable coastal development, the health of our coastal ecosystems, and sustainable seafood. These are the 4 focus areas of our current and future strategic plan. To conclude, Chairman and members of the subcommittee, the Sea Grant Association has a vision for the Sea Grant College program to become NOAA's primary university-based research, education, and technical assistance program in support of marine resource management and conservation. We believe that H.R. 5618 moves Sea Grant in that direction and are supportive of the bill in many ways and will work to support its enactment. Thank you for your time today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And Mr. DeVoe.
Chairman Lamson, Ranking Member Inglis, members of the subcommittee and staff, it's my pleasure to be here with you this morning. Good morning. My name is Rick DeVoe. I'm Executive Director of the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. I also want to offer my great appreciation to the subcommittee and to the committee in general for the support of the committee for Sea Grant and the National Sea Grant College program. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here and express my views from a state and regional perspective regarding H.R. 5618, the reauthorization of the National Sea Grant College program. The South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium is one of 31 university-based sea grant programs that work with coastal communities, business and industry, educational institutions, nonprofits, and others to generate and deliver user-driven, science-based information on coastal marine resource development, management, and conservation throughout the nation. The consortium in South Carolina consists of 8 member institutions: the Citadel, Clemson University, Coastal Carolina University, the College of Charleston, the Medical University of South Carolina, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, South Carolina State University, which is our MSI university in the state, and the University of South Carolina. They all provide the scientific and the technical expertise, facilities, and training to address coastal marine resource issues and opportunities in my state and indeed region-wide. The Sea Grant program nationally does represent more than 300 universities at any one time in engaging them in dealing with issues that we face on a day-to-day basis along our coast, oceans, and Great Lakes. I've been the consortium's director since 1997. However, I've been with South Carolina Sea Grant since 1980 upon graduation from the University of Rhode Island. My comments today reflect my experiences and insights gained through my work at the national, regional, and state levels. I want to start by giving one example of many that I've included in my written testimony of Sea Grant's effectiveness in South Carolina and in the region, and focus on an example from the upstate of South Carolina, if I may, recognizing that the influence of the oceans extends well inland from the coast and that activities in upland areas can have impacts on the coast. The consortium awarded a small grant to the Rayburn Mountain Science Center in Greenville, South Carolina in the mid-1980s to assemble a touch tank so that children in the upstate could become more familiar with sea life. According to the center, this modest investment by Sea Grant led ultimately to the development of the marine and ecology labs at the center. In 2006, Rayburn Mountain Science Center had over 90,000 students and over 20,000 attended lessons in the Natural Science Building, which houses the 2 labs. And last year, the consortium supported a grant for education presentation equipment needed for lessons in the new marine lab. I have attached a letter from the center to my written testimony from the center that provides additional details about this partnership. So my message here is that Sea Grant is a coastal marine program, but it certainly does extend its reach well inland from the coast and affects a lot of lives and activities. As a Sea Grant program director, I want to state that I strongly support the intent and many of the proposed changes contained within the National Sea Grant College Program Amendments Act of 2008 in H.R. 5618. I'm not going to be redundant with my colleague to my right, but we, again, from a state and regional perspective, endorse provisions of the bill that do make significant modifications to the rating and ranking program. This has constrained competition, it has created competition among our programs as opposed to fostering program excellence throughout the country. It includes provisions that would actually enhance Sea Grant's ability to work at a regional level. We do have our footprints at the state level, but this provides an opportunity for us to further formalize regional partnerships in line, for instance, with the various alliances that have been created around the country with governors in the states, in the West Coast, for instance, in the Gulf of Mexico and elsewhere. It provides an authorization of our overall base funding for Sea Grant, which allows for program flexibility, as Paul Anderson had mentioned. And we're tied now better with this bill to the priorities of the national level in terms of research and outreach for coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes resources. I indeed, again, from the state level, want to echo our concerns about the authorization levels in the bill. They are much lower than they are currently. And there could be a perception that with that reduction in authorization levels that there may be less confidence in the program. I would hope that we don't think that way, and we would like to be able to feel that we could attain those levels actually under the current situation, that we might be able to attain those levels in the future. I'd like to end my presentation with my thoughts on why I feel the National Sea Grant College Program is uniquely positioned to address many coastal marine challenges and opportunities that we face. Sea Grant is by definition a federal-state university partnership. Sea Grant employs an integrated research, education, and extension program that makes us unique in the federal government. Sea Grant addresses real problems and opportunities for real people. We work in response to the needs and opportunities that are presented to us. Sea Grant works at many geographic scales, and we can do that now, and we can do that with enhanced support. Sea Grant is seen by its constituencies as an honest broker, which allows us to get into discussions that otherwise we may not be there and help foster decisions and outcomes. And Sea Grant leverages significant resources. To conclude, I believe that H.R. 5618 moves Sea Grant in the right direction. It is important, however, that Sea Grant be provided with the resources it needs to meet the ever-increasing challenges ahead. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I will be glad to address any questions the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVoe. And Mr. Riley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Inglis, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to address this body in reference to H.R. 5618, National Sea Grant College Program. First, let me say that my testimony here today is reflective of the experiences that I have encountered while engaged in the Gulf and South Atlantic shrimp fisheries. I would be remiss if I did not point out this interaction only offers a small sampling of the activities the Sea Grant College Program is involved in this great nation as a whole. My first encounter with Sea Grant came in an educational setting. When I was in elementary school, I was in the 5th grade and was attending a career fair in the school that's hosting to get youth thinking about their future. This is where I first met Charlie Moss with Texas Sea Grant. He was the Missouri County Extension Agent and had a booth highlighting commercial fishing. This was of great interest to me since my father was an owner-operator of a Gulf shrimp trawler for decades. While I must have been a certain pest to Mr. Moss, he diligently answered the myriad of questions that I and others threw at him. This type of educational work continues today and was highlighted with a field trip on May the 8th of this year. The kindergarten students from OMR Roberts that participated in an annual field trip to the beach. I was there and participated as a volunteer father, helping pull a biological sampling stain to collect specimens for the students to look at. For the vast majority of these students, this is the first and perhaps the only interaction they will have with aquatic life and living form that is literally at their doorsteps on the beaches of coastal Texas. The field trip has become a much anticipated rite of passage for the students at OMR, and its success is in great part due to the participation of Sea Grant and the current Missouri County Extension Agent, Mr. Rich Tillman. In much the same vein, the research vessel Karma, better known as a floating classroom, has helped tens of thousands of Texans, most of whom are students from the 4th through the 12th grade, who come to gain a higher appreciation of vast ecological significance of our coastal estuaries and nearshore waters since its arrival in 2002. My professional interaction with Sea Grant has been both immense and rewarding. At Western Seafood, we have been actively involved with different Sea Grant-led or sponsored initiatives since the mid-1970s. Almost all of these initiatives and projects involve two common themes. The first of these is becoming more efficient with our time, production costs, and resources we are harvesting. The second theme is helping us use our innate knowledge as fishermen to become better stewards of our marine environment. In its early years, Sea Grant worked with fishermen such as my father, developed a very successful hang log trawl obstruction book. This cooperative effort for the shrimp industry, over 12,000 hangs were identified from the Rio Grande River to the mouth of Mississippi. It should be stressed this information was usually kept confidential among fishermen, but the cooperative spirit of Sea Grant convinced captains to share their personal information so that every producer would have an access to the collective industry wisdom. This handbook has become a Bible aboard trawlers until the introduction of more sophisticated navigation systems. It is credited with significantly reducing gear loss or damage from bottom obstructions and has literally saved the industry hundreds of millions of dollars. One of the first major breakthroughs that dealt with production efficiency was the introduction of the quad rig trawl. Prior to that time, shrimp trawlers typically pulled one net on each side of the vessel. With the advent of the quad rig, it allowed operators to pull 4 smaller nets, reducing drag and fuel consumption while increasing the amount of area covered due to an overall increase of head rope sweep of the nets involved. Production could be increased while cost of inputs actually went down. This work was pioneered by Sea Grant fishery specialist Gary Graham, working closely with industry. In the mid to late 1980s, another hurdle was jumped with the help of Sea Grant. The implementation of turtle excluder devices, or TEDs, was a very controversial issue. The vast majority of industry participants don't want anything to do with these devices, and Ashmarine Fishery Service, or NIMS, was having a very difficult time implementing their use. At this time, Sea Grant stepped in to defuse a very volatile situation. Using the goodwill built up over the last 2 decades of successful interaction with industry, fishery specialists worked to calm fears of the fishermen and worked with a few highliners to show the gear would not be as adverse to the operation as once feared. Once these trials showed success, the fleet started to adopt these devices and within a very short period of time came into full compliance with NIPS regulations. When bycatch became a major issue in the mid-1990s in the industry, Sea Grant was there to help the industry not only become compliant with new federal mandates, but also encourage development of industry-based solutions to the problem. As a result, the most efficient device that is legal today, the Jones-Davis, was developed by 2 fishermen. At the same time, Sea Grant specialists in the Gulf of Mexico spearheaded a massive effort that resulted in the shrimp fishery having what some have called the greatest data set of catch characterization of any fishery in the United States. Sea Grant remains in the forefront regarding efforts to make our fishery more economically sustainable and efficient. During 1990, the Texas Sea Grant program pioneered with Allied Chemical Company to evaluate the use of technologically advanced trawl fibers. As a result, over 500 trawlers converted to the use of spectrum netting, which significantly increased trawl strength while creating less drag in the water. This transferred to better fuel efficiency, and its application is now being used worldwide. Today, Sea Grant is demonstrating a less expensive high-technological fiber, sapphire, which has been rapidly adopted shrimp vessels for its strength and contributions to energy efficiency. During a 2001 trip to Iceland to visit vendors and processing equipment that we utilize in our shoreside operations, I became introduced to the hydrodynamic trawl door. I was intrigued by the concept, and in 2004 started Seagull partnering manufacturers around the world so we could introduce these new trawl doors in the Gulf shrimp fishery. When I found that interesting in doing so, I purchased an off-the-shelf model from an Icelandic company. When I was planning the sea trial, I contacted fishery specialist Gary Graham to see if he was interested in going along. He did, and what he witnessed was pure failure. But he was supportive and urged me to continue. 2 months later, we regrouped with another size door, went on a second sea trial. Gary accompanied us then, and we came back successful in most regards. We still had a production equivalency problem to deal with, but overcame this in short order. After numerous trials and modifications to these new doors, we were able to show catch rates that are equal to that of traditional gear, but with a fuel savings of 30%. At this time, Sea Grant stepped in with technology transfer in mind. Gary Graham and Sea Grant economist Mike Habey were able to secure funding from USDA, the Texas Governor's Energy Office, to fund 2 pilot demonstration programs. These projects funded the purchase of new high-efficiency trawl doors, high-strength netting, for cooperative research and demonstrations within the shrimp industry for scientifically based and statistically reviewed study to document the potential fuel savings the gear would produce. This effort alone introduced the gear to fishery as a whole and lended it credibility. It is through this effort this gear is being adopted rapidly by industry. Today in the ports of Brownsville and Port Isabel in South Texas, 50% of the 180 to 190 active vessels in the fishery will have converted to this gear prior to the opening of our Texas shrimp season on July 15th. One could extrapolate this savings could approach 2 million gallons of fuel in just these 2 ports based on historical consumption averages of the fleet. At $4 a gallon, this will have a significant impact on the continued viability of fishing in South Texas. In conclusion, I would like to stress Sea Grant is a unique program that has provided a vital research and outreach link for the fishery. The savings to the fishery in the Texas program has consistently contributed through its research and educational efforts that far exceeded the cost for funding of this worthwhile organization. I would ask you to continue to endorse Sea Grant and that serious support be directed towards continued existence. Thank you for my time and consideration regarding my testimony.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will go into our first round of questioning, and the chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes for that first set of questions. And I would have a question for the whole panel, if some of you would comment, anyone who cares to. H.R. 5618 expands the Sea Grant program's mandate beyond its state and local focus to include regional and national issues. What is the benefit of expanding the mandate, and how will the Sea Grant programs maintain their connections to the current state and local constituents? And aren't you already undertaking some regionally and nationally research and extension projects now? Go ahead, Mr. McLean, if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that as the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy recognized in terms of listening to a great number of citizens, a great number of constituents, and encapsulating the challenges that are ahead of us in the marine and coastal environment, the regional approach to the solutions that arise within localized communities, coastal communities, these challenges and tasks are best approached regionally. The challenges don't know geopolitical lines, they don't know state borders and the like, and for us to be approaching them regionally is a very logical approach. The work that we have ongoing today in a more broad-based application of science is not quite bringing home the value of the Sea Grant program. I think by relying on Sea Grant to be the leader in a regional solution to the scientific and technical challenges that we have today, we have a well-practiced methodology that you've heard from the witnesses in terms of its effectiveness and its efficiency. I'd also like to highlight the leadership that the Sea Grant program and each of the member institutions is showing by helping to lead a regional interpretation and a regional prioritization of what is now a national ocean research priority plan that was finally developed after many years of the ocean and coastal community wanting many different things. We now have a priority that we can come to you with and identify what's the most important, and we can concentrate our efforts in that regard. Sea Grant is leading the development of regional prioritization of these challenges so that we as a nation can have an agreed upon path forward. I think the institution is very important to the success of that effort.
Okay.
Just on the second point, Mr. Chairman, the regional planning approach that the Sea Grant College program has undertaken over the last couple of years is yielding regionally specific prioritization of issues and research approaches to the National Ocean Research Plan. And by doing so, we're able to bring each of the states in the region, for instance, my region, the Northeast, several states are involved, and the Sea Grant programs bring to that discussion the varying complexions of those issues from each of the states' perspectives. But as soon as we get into that room and around that table and talk about these, we realize that there's more commonality with the challenges. There are differences, and by me speaking for the University of Maine, for example, and sitting down with the director from MIT and Woods Hole, we're able to bring skill sets from all these different research institutions and universities from around our region to contemplate more innovative and interdisciplinary approaches to what these problems are. And as was just stated, those problems transcend geographic boundaries. So the regional approach really has been somewhat common in the Sea Grant enterprise, and now by formalizing this and making some explicit steps in that direction, I think we can really get some work done.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
just a quick comment. The need to look at issues and opportunities and resources on a regional basis is profound, as the Ocean Commission has pointed out. However, why Sea Grant will maintain its legs on the ground in the state and local levels is because a lot of decision making occurs at that level. 80% of all land use decisions are made at a municipal or local level. So we have to understand these issues from a broader perspective, and the research needs to focus on what are climate change or sea level rise in a broader perspective. But there are nuances at a state and local level that need to be dealt with. The management structures and the policy structures are really at the state level. We don't manage regionally, we manage state by state. So what we're trying to do is add to the mix of tools and information to allow this decision making to occur at a variety of scales.
Okay, Mr. Riley, I'm going to get you to talk a little differently than that, if I may. Give me your perspective on Sea Grant from the, I guess, for the role that it plays in providing technical assistance and information to your industry. I know you gave some little bit of comments on that during your prepared remarks. What specific examples can you provide regarding tangible benefits that your community has received over the years from the Sea Grant activities?
Well, of late it's been technology transfer, but they're too numerous to really mention in this forum. I'd like to get back to you in writing on that.
Okay.
But take, for instance, as you all well know, the business I'm in, shrimp business, is pretty tough these days. And going back into 2003, when Sea Grant became aware of USDA money being available to commercial fishermen through the Trade Adjustment and Assistance Program, there were some qualifications to that, being that to receive that funding, these fishermen had to be trained. And Texas Sea Grant, along with that, of all the others along the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast involved with the shrimp fishery, but Texas in particular set out a program, held 28 workshops from Port Arthur to Brownsville, trained 2,300 or so, this is by memory, 2,300 or so eligible fishermen, and were able to get them over 11 or close to $11 million in direct assistance. And that's pretty significant. And these are individual fishermen, not boat owners and things like that, because there was income qualifications to it. A lot of ownership did not qualify for this, this assistance. So this was directly to crews and captains and things of that nature. And that, without that training and without even, getting the knowledge out or getting the word out, a lot of this would have gone unrealized. And then you have today in our effort throughout the industry to become more efficient, and what we kind of started in-house at Western has really ballooned into something pretty big with the numbers I've given you on fuel cost reduction. Sea Grant is working together on a regional basis, and you've got guys from Texas going to North Carolina, which I accompanied them on that trip for a week of workshops for fishermen there, and same things happen in Mississippi, and there's all kind of feelers coming out from Louisiana and the other Gulf states to get that kind of program running. So, I mean, they do work well together in the extension end of it. And as far as technology transfer, it's a good thing.
Thank you very much. I will now recognize Mr. Inglis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in a number of things that I've heard in the testimony and seen in our charter. One is aquaculture, which I guess is something that we're big on at Sea Grant, right? And I guess, Mr. DeVoe, we're pursuing that in South Carolina and various places.
We are, yes, sir. And Sea Grant has supported a lot of research in aquaculture in the Southeast and in South Carolina. We still have a viable but small marine shrimp aquaculture industry. There is back in the 1980s, crawfish farming came to South Carolina, and actually it was some interaction between our Sea Grant extension specialist in aquaculture, Jack Whetstone, who met up with a fellow who has passed away since, but Larry de La Bretonne from Louisiana, and brought the ability to culture, brought the technology to culture, to grow crawfish in ponds to South Carolina. In South Carolina, though, the primary type of aquaculture that goes on is shellfish aquaculture. So we have strong clam aquaculture, and there's work looking at trying to develop a single oyster aquaculture industry. As you know, our oysters are clusters naturally. Right. But for single oyster aquaculture, which gets a premium price, that's being pursued. So there are a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah. And some of those may involve those, I think as Mr. McLean mentioned, the pretty nifty idea of submerging the barge and growing things there. Mm-hmm. Especially with the pond-grown shrimp. Mr. Wiley might hop in here because my brother also has a shrimp boat, and he tells us, you got to watch what you're eating when you're eating shrimp, because the shrimp that you're eating may be absolutely shot full of antibiotics from wherever it's come from, if it's been grown in a pond. And so I suppose that I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I wonder if do we do research on that at Sea Grant, or does Sea Grant look at more of the ocean-based shrimping rather than, say, pond-raised shrimp?
I will say that Sea Grant's investment in aquaculture in the last decade has focused on sustainable shrimp culture and sustainable aquaculture in general. Mm-hmm. issues with respect to what's in the shrimp that we eat that is cultured, I think, is really plays out in the international scene, and the importation of shrimp from overseas, which most consumers are buying because they're so cheap.
Right.
And it's affected the ability of the United States culture industry, and I'm just saying, but it certainly has affected the viability, the economic viability of our domestic shrimp industry as well.
Right.
So I think the focus has been in the last decade or so is trying to develop, they call it biosecurity, to try to maintain a crop, if I could use that term for the shrimp, that does not contain the kinds of constituents that we might see coming in from overseas.
Right. And maintaining that crop in the ocean, I guess, has another, speaking of antibiotics and pharmaceuticals, I take it we're doing some research on that sort of thing, too, through Sea Grant on whether sewage effluent is actually affecting the reproduction of shrimp and other kind of species. Is that something Sea Grant does, or do you have any research going on there?
I think that varies depending on what region of a country you look. I know I can only speak for South Carolina, my region. The issues of stormwater runoff are extremely important, even though we're a relatively flat state. I mean, in terms of slope,
right.
There's still, during rainfall events, we'll get a lot of runoff. And there are a lot of materials that do run off into our systems. We're concerned about that because the species that inhabit our estuaries and our tidal creeks tend to spend their youngest portions of their lives up in the upper headwaters of those creeks, and that's where the connections are between the land and what's running off in the water. Coliform bacteria is a particular concern in terms of water quality, and so there have been a number of programs throughout the country through our Sea Grants Coastal Community Program to look at ways to manage stormwater on site or on land through various low impact development scenarios and other things to try to minimize the flow of that water off the land into our fragile estuaries.
Yeah, I grew up in one of those estuaries, actually, the May River in Bluffton, South Carolina. So one last question for time. Wind farms, Sea Grant does work on how those may work offshore?
Ocean-based wind farms?
Right.
But I think, again, like Mr. DeVoe said, that depends on the region and the states that are involved. Some of our parts of our country are way ahead of others in terms of harvesting wind. Speaking from our region, there are engineers who have said that the Gulf of Maine is the Middle East of wind, and that we have to start harvesting wind up there. There's a lot of wind. And so there are indeed some explorations going on to do this kind of thing that may or may not be in state waters, but certainly in federal waters. And some of the technologies that will need to come to bear on that, the water's too deep. Up there, they will have to be tethered and floating structures, which requires a tremendous amount of new thinking around engineering. And I expect my program to be approached by that class of scientists in the coming years, and we'll entertain research proposals and try to feed some money into that important issue if we have the money to feed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. English. I was thinking, but I'll hold my tongue for a bit. Mr. Bartlett, you're recognized.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I received both my master's and my doctorate from a university that had a land-grant college. And I don't know all the reasons why, but the Department of Agriculture was one of the better schools in the university. And although my degree was from the College of Arts and Sciences, I took many of my courses in the department, in the School of Agriculture, because they had better teachers and better courses. My course in advanced embryology was reproduction in poultry, for instance. Well, as a result of this focus, more than 50 years ago, our university, the School of Agriculture, had an enormous focus on conservation and stewardship of our land. My perception is that we have related to our waters, both the lakes and the oceans, as if they were endless opportunities for exploitation rather than resources that required conservation and stewardship. And I'm wondering if you believe the Sea Grant program will eventually have the same kind of focus on our waters for conservation and stewardship that the land grant colleges have brought to our land masses. I think there's increasing evidence that if we don't have that kind of focus, the opportunities for exploitation are going to be diminished in the future. What do you see?
Mr. Bartlett, if I may, I think that the direction that the Sea Grant program is going in, and to a certain demonstrated extent has been, is to achieve a balance between the productivity of oceans and coastal environments, and then to make sure that that productivity is in fact sustainable. It can only be sustainable by having an appropriately targeted conservation ethic. And I think the research that Sea Grant undertakes is targeted to be community responsive and constituent responsive. Most of our coastal constituents are very aware of the facts around us regarding water quality and the availability of healthful seafood resources or other harvestable resources that come from the sea. I think conservation and productivity are very closely tied. The science that Sea Grant does reinforces this message, and I think the new direction, or I should say the enhanced direction of our strategic plan from Sea Grant and the individual Sea Grant institutes, the 32 institutes that comprise the program, are really targeting that direction, that we need to be sustainable, we need to be conservation minded, but we also need to balance that with the productivity of the coastal communities and even the products that are shipped inland to other parts that are away from the coast. But our coast is our engine, and we need to protect it. We need to protect it in terms of the resource, its sustainability, and the coastal communities that rely on it. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that area.
I'd like to, if I may, offer a perspective. Sea Grant was created in the 60s, and it was to foster wise use and conservation of coastal marine and Great Lakes resources. So I think the ethic that you describe is embodied in the program, and it has been since the beginning. I think what we're dealing with today is, not today, but over the last few decades, is the fact that the coast and the oceans and the Great Lakes have become much more and more attractive for people to come live, work, and play along. And the challenge that we have as a Sea Grant program, but also all of us have as as stewards of these areas, is to try to deal with that emerging pressure, those emerging pressures, to try to maintain that balance as we move forward. It's not that we don't have a philosophy, but the challenge is for us as a relatively modest program relative to the land grant system, which is more than an order of magnitude higher in funding than the Sea Grant program is, does provide those challenges for us, and maybe one of the reasons why we would really like to see some more support for the program at the federal level, in which we can then leverage that support at the state and local level.
I can say that with the work that Sea Grant has done, especially in Texas and those involved in it, that they have shepherded the fishing community, which I'm involved in, into becoming more sustainable and ecologically friendly. We're a little bit unique in the company I'm managing in that we are diversified and have the funds available to do a little bit of research and become more efficient in our own harvesting. And at times, some of that research has paved the way for Sea Grant to get out into industry as a greater whole. And they've done an excellent job of trying to foster an attitude amongst commercial shrimpers in the Gulf to become more aware and become more sustainable. Of course, that's the key word these days in any fishing enterprise is sustainability. But they've done an excellent job of fostering that line of thought and getting it out into industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Our second round, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes as chairman. Mr. McLean, in the last reauthorization, the language was added to the provision on fellowships to ensure equal access for minority and economically disadvantaged students. How successful was the Sea Grant program, or has it been, in their efforts to involve minority-serving institutions and the efforts to increase the diversity of students participating in the Sea Grant program?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The addition of that language is a very important opportunity for us. We recognize in our workforce that we do not have currently in the ocean and coastal professions the construct of full representation throughout the image of America in our own workforce. And we're working very hard to change the distribution, the appeal, and the availability of opportunities to students from all universities in all areas. We have linkages with minority-serving institutions in the Sea Grant program, in particular in the southern and in the southeast area of South Carolina State, which was mentioned earlier, is a minority-serving institute and is part of the South Carolina Sea Grant Institute. And also we have Jackson State in Mississippi, and I've worked personally very closely with Jackson State in bringing scientists aboard our NOAA ships and throughout our science programs. I don't have a statistic or a number that I could report to you, but I can assure you that our efforts are ongoing. I appreciate the opportunity that language has given us in order to sustain our efforts to recruit a broad spectrum of students, and we even go further. We note that a few short years ago, the distribution of women, for example, in the Sea Grant Fellowship and the Knauss Fellowship program was approaching 50-50 in its distribution. And I'm happy to recognize now that the responsiveness and the students that we're placing in the Knauss Fellowship are now 75% female. And we're trying to attain the same sort of positive growth in the direction of underrepresented communities of students in our workforce, and we think that the Sea Grant Fellowships are a marvelous way to accomplish that. We have additional programs in NOAA that the Congress has supported routinely, and they represent educational partnership programs where we directly tie with additional minority-serving institutes. We've created centers of excellence in schools that are developing their programs in particular academic disciplines that reach NOAA sciences and NOAA-related sciences, atmospherically and oceanically. We're working hard in that direction, and I think, as you can appreciate, the change, the size of the rudder that we need to be turning is quite significant, but we're working earnestly at it.
Thank you. One of the provisions of the administration's proposal is the matching fund requirements for the regional and national partnerships. The administration is proposing that the partnerships, as well as the interagency cooperation, be exempt from the matching fund requirement. The matching fund requirement has provided leverage for the state programs to achieve all that they have thus far. So without these matching funds, where is the funding going to come from to do these collaborative projects? Anyone?
Well, I'll speak to that. The matching component of the Sea Grant program has long been a hallmark of its construct, and it's an important way for bringing our universities and our states to the issues. Some of the challenges of doing interinstitutional arrangements and regional approaches that we've talked about earlier in the hearing have been encumbered by this matching requirement, because administratively we end up with negotiations and some delicacies between institutions and between states about trying to meet these administrative obligations of matching and the fiscal arrangements that have to be set up to accommodate for that. Sometimes they become a distraction to the real science and the real approach that we ought to be taking. So I think that there is value to considering this exemption so that we're able to focus on the work to be done and be able to bring the right players to the table. And we still have the opportunity through our institutional arrangements to bring other resources to bear and make sure that there's an efficient arrangement. But I think that that's some of the motive behind this change.
How close do y'all work with the National Marine Fisheries Service?
I think that varies around the country, but in some cases very, very closely, helping them with training and education of their council members. There's been many collaborative research science projects with some of the fisheries management councils. I think that that relationship varies around the regions and based on some particularly challenging issues that some of the regions have had. Sea Grant is a science unbiased science-based unbiased broker and a convener. And I think the Fisheries Councils have recognized that and brought us in when they can to help
But we need
us.
to work on that more so. There's concern, and I would like for you to comment, if you don't mind, Mr. Riley, on some of this, because I know that there are a lot of fishermen particularly in the western Gulf of Mexico, who are concerned about some of the work that NMFS has done as far as snapper and snapper seasons have concern, and I know that that's in other places, and I know that your industry gets some of the brunt of some of the problem. But is there a way that some say that NMFS has too many folks that sit at desks in laboratories and don't know enough about what's happening on the water? And it sounds like more you guys know more about what's going on the water. Is there a way to build that collaboration to a greater extent?
I think in our case, especially with Texas Sea Grant and others around the Gulf, they've collaborated well with National Marine Fisheries Service, especially out of Pascagoula with the harvesting lab there. They've done so much work on development of better TEDs, more efficient, BRDs or bycatch reduction devices, which speaks to that snapper problem. But the problem is twofold in that snapper issue, and we'd be here all day talking about that. But National Marine Fisheries Service, I think, bears too much of the brunt for what the Gulf Council in that particular setting has done. The National Marine Fisheries Service has used some sound science. At the time, it was the best available science, which has changed, to make recommendations. And in that particular situation, the Gulf Council has not always heeded those recommendations and have set harvest levels above what even the National Marine Fisheries Service was recommending. So, they become a scapegoat in that issue. But I do know that there's a great collaboration right now of getting new BRDs out in the industry, and the harvesting lab, which has purchased actually several thousand of the 3 different types of devices, is using the Sea Grant College program and the Gulf and South Atlantic Fisheries Foundation to get those out to the individual fishermen in different ports, and that's a pretty good program to introduce them to some of these more efficient BRDs that otherwise they would not be doing on their own just due to the cost constraints involved.
I'm well over my time, but if you would just comment briefly as you can for me on the challenges that you face in this industry that you're involved with, and whether or not Sea Grant is well positioned to help address some of those issues in the future.
Well, the biggest 2 challenges we faced are high cost of inputs and low cost of product that you're putting on the market due to global competition. Nobody in this room is doing very well with $4 a gallon diesel, and Sea Grant has been doing a great job of getting some of this gear that we kind of developed in-house, but getting it out to the fishery as a whole to keep them fishing in a sustainable level. If you take the 30% mark at $4 a gallon, that boat can operate as if it is using fuel at $2.80 a gallon, and that's pretty significant. And also in the development and research we're doing on these BRDs, we're starting to have an issue now of crewing issues. We can't find willing participants to get on these boats for the length of times we're asking them to do it, and we're understaffed at times during high volume periods, and it would behoove us to become more efficient with what we bring up, basically bring more of the target species up and eliminate anything else before it gets on the back deck, to make it easier on the crews. And that's one aspect we've kind of taken in-house at Western, and Sea Grant has done an excellent job through their fishery extension service to foster that kind of thinking too, amongst others.
Thank you very much. Mr. Inglis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to that, the offshore wind farm concept. I understand that the Minerals Management Service very recently, May the 19th, closed the public comment and competing nominations for interim leases for data collection and research for some 5-year leases, which is pretty exciting to be moving forward in that. And one of the challenges, as I understand it, is transmitting the power. If you do it offshore, transmitting the power back to shore. Pretty expensive, lose some energy that way. Any research, that's going on in that regard, or perhaps somehow storing the energy some other way, or turning it into something else out there and then bringing it in some way besides a power line?
It's not an area that NOAA is actively working in, although I think the nature of the assessments that Sea Grant Science has supported is to identify where are the most wind-prone areas that could be reliable generators of winds. And I believe that also in Oregon Sea Grant, there are projects that are looking at wave-generated energies. But in terms of the actual electrical engineering component of that challenge, that would exceed our expertise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that I'm not familiar with any particular institution, certainly not mine, that are working in that world. It's probably superconductivity kinds of research, but I'm sure somewhere there is.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with any either, sir.
I could look into that for you and get back to you if you'd like.
I guess probably a place that you all may get even more involved is the issues involving species, impact on species, about having the wind farms out there and that sort of thing. Of course, I suppose if you're looking at fisheries, it's a great opportunity because suddenly they got a place to live. But I guess for birds and that sort of thing, there's a little bit of a challenge. So, anybody have any research that you all are doing in that regard, or?
I'll just say that you're certainly correct that that's an avenue that Sea Grant programs can help to bring some researchers and other science capacity to those issues around the conflicting use.
Yeah.
And certainly in the Northeast, there's been some issues around a wind farm offshore near Cape Cod. And I believe our colleagues in Massachusetts, the Sea Grant community and others, have been helping to bring those perspectives to the table and try to help these people sort out, yes, the science and what are the technical challenges that we have to address, but also the other social science conflicts. And so there's deep in experience of bringing people together to help them understand and work through perspectives so that we can learn to understand why other people have a differing perspective. Because in some ways, I think you're quite right, that's going to be one of the big challenges of getting these kinds of new innovative energy generation systems up and running, whether they're on the ocean or terrestrial.
Right.
I'm going to, if I may, just one brief comment on that. One thing is that, two things. One is that the kind of research on that would be needed to enhance the transfer of energy from offshore to onshore probably would exceed the capacity of the Sea Grant program as a whole. I just think it's very high level, high and very expensive, very important, type of research, and I support what Paul and Craig have said about that. It's traditionally not an area that Sea Grant has engaged. However, I'll play on a little bit on what Paul mentioned, is the fact that any kind of offshore energy development will require an onshore base of operation. So we will be dealing with these issues if they emerge, if this potential is actually realized, whether it's wind or waves or currents or maybe even back to traditional gas exploration, that sort of thing, is going to have some effect on the coast. And that's not a qualitative comment. It's just it's going to have some effect on the coast because they're going to need an on-land coastal base of operation. I think that's where we're going to be able to play a much more significant role in working with communities to help them think about how they want to shape that development. One of the provisions in the energy bill, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be really off on this because I'm not that familiar with it, was that and I don't think this component passed, was a requirement that the onshore base of operation could be identified but couldn't sway more than 50 miles one direction or another. And that puts a huge challenge to that community or those communities that are within that zone to try to accommodate that kind of development. So the onshore connection is, in my mind, in my opinion, and we acknowledge it in our strategic plan, is something that we will probably have to do as a state or have to deal with as a state. And the best way to do that, as been mentioned, is to bring the partners to the table and try to work through these challenges.
Yeah, if you could work through as you did the turtle extruder question, and bring those parties together, then
this one might be easier.
It might be easier, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bartlett, further questions?
Thank you very much. There's an old adage that says what's everybody's responsibility is nobody's responsibility. And this reality impacts you in two different venues. On the land side, you quite literally get dumped on. Most of my district, the water flows into the Chesapeake Bay. I have no land bordering the Chesapeake Bay, but we are acutely aware of what we do on our land really impacts the health of the bay. Then when you get out into the oceans, our territorial waters run, depending upon where you sit, 3 miles or 20 miles, I guess, and that's only a tiny percent of the whole oceans out there. And so the health of our national waters depends a great deal on internationally what's going on in the rest of the ocean. What kind of success are you having at forging partnerships on the land side so that you don't get dumped on, and on the ocean side so that we don't get depleted because of excess harvesting by others?
I'll speak to one particular partnership that the National Sea Grant Program was able to cultivate with the EPA over the last couple of years, and more speaking to how coastal communities, or even communities up in the watershed such as yours, are planning their development, planning their futures around honoring ecosystem principles. We call this smart growth, and that's the jargon that's being kicked around. But nationally, Sea Grant created a partnership program with EPA, and both institutions with some money and EPA money were able to get going some competitive programs around the country to start bringing communities together and say, all right, where are we going to have these kinds of activities? You know, thinking about things like impervious surfaces and agricultural development and other kinds of stormwater treatment, stormwater management, and try to do that in a collaborative, interdisciplinary way, because oftentimes, as Mr. DeVoe referred to earlier, whereas a lot of our really important coastal decisions around ecological health are happening in a town, in a municipality. We like to bring municipalities together and get them to think about these issues because they're in a watershed together. And so the Smart Growth Program is just one example of trying to bring those towns together and learn some science principles and learn some best management practices. And Sea Grant's been really, our role in that was bringing all the players together. You've heard that in all of our little stories here this morning, that our role is convening and getting people to understand one another's perspectives. So that's perhaps an example of something that we're trying to do to affect what you're talking about.
Let me give you just one example of something that we do on the land, which I think is really dumb, which impacts the quality of our waters. If you're not near a municipality, so you have public water and sewer, the only land that you can develop is by definition farmland, because it can't slope more than 25% or they won't perk it. And it has to perk or they won't let you build on it. Land that slopes less than 25% and perks is by definition farmland, isn't it? And then when you put in a septic system, by law, they require you to take the effluent and inject it in the ground under the root zone of plants. And they're then distressed that there's an increase in nitrogen level because this nutrient, which the plants would happily take up, is now by law injected into the ground. It's not a recycling system. It's a disposal system, and it's spawned of ignorance. What can you all do to change that? And by the way, you don't need either a well or ground which perks to build a house. More than enough water falls on the roof of your house to meet all of your needs for the year. If you husband it, you don't have to be really rationing very much. And we now have composting toilets so that you could build your house out on the middle of the freeway when that gets abandoned because gas is too expensive. And you could live very happily there. You know, what can you all do to bring some sanity to our land-based program so that we aren't polluting the groundwater?
Let me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bartlett. Thank you for that question. I can't promise you an exact solution, but I could demonstrate the methodology that the Sea Grant program has taken in order to unite the heartland of the country with the coastal community, and how what happens in in the heart of the country, in the center of the country, is being deposited, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, and where we have certain introductions of materials that aren't naturally occurring, and they're having an environmental consequence in the Gulf of Mexico. In Oklahoma, in Norman, Oklahoma, we have established a position for a Sea Grant extension agent. And although Oklahoma's time as a maritime state is quite dated, geological epochs ago, and the fossil evidence is of course there, we're very proud to see that Sea Grant had the leadership and the forward thinking to be bringing a representative, an outreach representative, who can communicate the challenges of the farming community to the coastal community and the coastal community back to the farming community. We're also looking there, and the purpose for this person's arrival was to build understanding for coastal resiliency, hazard resiliency, but certainly one of the threats to the coastal community are depositions, dumping, and the like that takes place in other locations. But my point is to impress upon you the flexibility of the Sea Grant program and how we can bring various fields of knowledge to communities that aren't normally running into that conversation. And I'm hopeful that we could be doing more of this in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Aiken, would you like to be recognized? Welcome.
I didn't have any questions for the moment, especially after Roscoe's eloquence here.
Mr. Chairman, if I'll have just a moment to note something. I wanted to do a development where we were using rainwater from your house, and it went into a cistern, and the state people told me, oh, you can't do that. You can't use rainwater. I said, help me understand this. The rain falls on the hog lot, and then the water goes from the hog lot into the creek, and the creek goes into the reservoir, and you pull it out of the reservoir and treat it a little and tell me that's drinking water. I said, can I please have the water before it goes through the hog lot? You know, we really have some really silly regulations, and I hope that, that through your interest in maintaining the quality of our waters, that you can counsel with our land people that they get some sanity into their regulations.
Mr. DeVoe, wanted to make
Thank
a comment?
you. Just to comment on that, just to follow on with Mr. McLean's comment about Norman, Oklahoma. The Sea Grant program has established recently formally established a coastal communities program. And what the national office has done is provided some limited resources, which I think a lot of our programs have leveraged, to develop capacity to have specialists at extension person, but not in fisheries, but in coastal development. And every state is addressing their issues in the way that is most appropriate for their states. But we have mechanisms in place throughout the Sea Grant network now where these are folks who are planners, or they may have expertise in stormwater management or some aspect of development. Paul mentioned the smart growth thing, low impact development, some of these new ways of trying to deal with both existing developments and trying to minimize runoff, or new developments and trying to incorporate technology into the development of those. But I would submit to you that even as frustrating as this is to me and a lot of us, is that science only goes so far. We can provide as much of the best information with the best rationale that we could ever come up with, and these decisions are not just science decisions. There are other considerations that decision makers have to take into account when they make those. So I think we try as best we can is to present the best information that we can generate through our universities and get it to you and other decision makers in a fashion that's usable and understandable, and then we sort of have to sit back and see what happens and see how the process works out. Our engagement with citizens and schools is a way to let's say, build that public awareness, and maybe through a public perspective, there may be ways to change perceptions and also decision making. But it is one of the challenges that we face as a science and information organization.
And I guess Mr. Bartlett would look for common sense in some of these things.
I would. There's not a whole lot of that out there.
Mr. Aiken?
Just to comment for the benefit of Mr. Bartlett, we lived 25 years in a house where a water supply was off the roof in a big cistern. The only thing we got wrong was it was an asbestos roof. But
Thank you all for appearing here today. We very much appreciate the time that you've taken with us. Under the rules of the committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements and any additional questions that they might have for the witnesses. This hearing is now adjourned.
Very good comments.
Work in something else. Oh, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah.